This trip is just for family, Orlando told me with that coldness that froze my blood. I was standing at the airport, my suitcase in hand, my heart breaking into pieces as I watched my own son cross out my name from the list of passengers. Maria will come in your place, he added, not even looking me in the eyes, as if I were some bothersome stranger. Elena, my daughter-in-law, smiled that fake smile I knew so well. Go home, Antonia. This isn't for you. Her words pierced me like knives, but what hurt the most was seeing how everyone avoided looking at me. My own son, flesh of my flesh, the child I had raised with so much love, couldn't even hold my gaze as they publicly humiliated me. But let me tell you how I got to that moment, because this story started 3 weeks earlier, when I still believed I was part of this family. The scent of cinnamon filled my kitchen as I prepared Orlando's favorite orange cake. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the excitement I felt ever since he had called me. Mom, we have a surprise for you, he had said with that sweet voice I hadn't heard in years. A family trip, all of us together. Those words were like music to my ears. It had been so long since I had felt invisible in my son's life, ever since Elena arrived and slowly pushed me aside from everything. Family dinners had turned into intimate gatherings. Celebrations had become small, just us. And I had become a nuisance they tolerated out of obligation. But this time, it was different. This time, they had included me, remembered me, invited me to be part of something special again. I spent whole days buying new clothes. I went into every store in the mall looking for the perfect outfit. I wanted to look good. I wanted Orlando to be proud of his mother. I bought a coral dress that made me look younger, comfortable yet elegant shoes, and I even allowed myself to buy the pearl necklace I had been admiring for months in the window. The nights before the trip, I couldn't sleep from the excitement. I stayed awake imagining conversations, shared laughs, pictures we would take together. I envisioned dinners under the stars, walks on paradise beaches, moments when I would finally feel part of my son's life again. I obsessively checked my suitcase, folding and refolding every piece of clothing, considering every detail carefully. I included my medications, books for the flight, and small gifts I had bought for each of them. I wanted this trip to be perfect. I wanted to prove to them that their decision to include me was the right one. The morning of the trip, I woke up before dawn. I got ready with special care, choosing every detail of my appearance. The mirror reflected the image of an older woman, but dignified, ready to reclaim the place she had lost in her family's heart. I arrived at the airport an hour early, my heart beating with excitement and nerves. I searched the crowd for Orlando and Elena, anxious to see them, to begin this adventure I had waited so long for. When I finally spotted them near the check-in counter, something in their expressions made me doubt. Orlando seemed tense. He avoided looking at me directly, and Elena was whispering something in the ear of a woman I didn't recognize at first. It was Maria, Elena's friend. But what was she doing there if this was supposed to be a family trip? I approached with a smile, dragging my suitcase, ready to greet them and start what I thought would be the best trip of our lives. Good morning, I said, my voice filled with hope and excitement. That's when Orlando looked at me for the first time that morning, and his eyes didn't contain the joy I expected to see. They contained something much worse. Pity mixed with irritation. Mom, he began, and with that first word, I knew something was terribly wrong. We need to talk. We need to talk, Orlando repeated, and each of those words fell on me like drops of ice. He led me to a corner of the airport, away from Elena and Maria, who were watching us from a distance, with expressions I couldn't decipher at that moment. I thought maybe there was some issue with the tickets, some last-minute change to the itinerary. Mom, there's been a change of plans, he started, unable to hold my gaze. His hands nervously fiddled with his phone, as he used to do when he was a child and had broken something at home. The trip, well, we decided it would be better if it was just for the closest family. But I'm your family, I whispered, feeling the words choke in my throat. I'm your mother, Orlando. What could be closer than that? He ran his hand through his hair, that gesture he inherited from his father. It's not personal, Mom. It's just that Elena thought it would be more appropriate if Maria came with us. She and Elena have a lot in common. And you, well, you don't quite fit in with our plans. I didn't fit in. Those words echoed in my head like a painful echo. 45 years after giving birth to this man, raising him, sacrificing my youth, my dreams, my very life for him, I didn't fit in with his plans. But Orlando, my voice trembled, I've been preparing for this for weeks. I bought new clothes, arranged all my commitments, even canceled my medical appointments. I was so excited. I know, Mom, and I'm sorry, but it's already decided. Maria is coming with us, and you're going home. We returned to where Elena and Maria were. Elena's friend looked at me with a smile that tried to be understanding, but only came off as condescending. Antonia, I hope you understand, she said. It's better for everyone this way. Elena then approached with that cold elegance that had always intimidated me. She was wearing a flawless travel outfit, her hair perfectly styled, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dear Antonia, she said with that sweet voice she used when there were visitors. This really is the best. This trip is going to be very active. Lots of walking, activities that require energy. At your age, you might hurt yourself. At my age, as if I were a decrepit old woman incapable of taking care of myself, as if my 69 years automatically made me a burden, something to tolerate rather than celebrate. Besides, Elena continued, Maria and I have so many things to plan. We're organizing some events for when we return, and we need this time to coordinate everything. You wouldn't be interested in those things. I watched as Orlando nodded to every word from his wife, like a puppet obediently following her commands. The boy who once promised me he would always take care of me, that he would never leave me alone. Now I was standing there, validating each of Elena's cruel excuses. But you can take care of the plants while we're gone, Elena added with a smile that was meant to be generous. And maybe clean the house a bit. You know how we like everything perfect when we get back. There it was, the raw and naked truth. I wasn't her mother in this scenario. I was her free domestic worker, the convenient woman who kept their things in order while they lived their perfect life without me. Maria came forward with my ticket replaced by hers. Thank you for understanding, Antonia. I really appreciate you making this trip possible for me. Making it possible for her, as if I had voluntarily given up my place, as if it had been my decision to give my happiness away to a stranger. Orlando finally looked at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a glimpse of the child who used to run to me when he was hurt, who hugged me when he had nightmares, who told me I was the best mom in the world. Mom, please don't make that face. We'll do something special when we get back, I promise. Another empty promise, like all the ones he had made me in the past few years. Dinners that got canceled, visits that got postponed, calls that never came. The voice over the loudspeaker announced the first call for the flight. My flight. The flight I had been waiting for weeks. The trip that had filled my thoughts with hope and joy. Elena took Maria by the arm. Come on, we need to check in. She turned to me one last time. Antonia, call a taxi to go home and remember to water the balcony plants, please. I stood there, holding my suitcase like an idiot, watching them walk away toward the boarding area. Orlando didn't turn back once. Elena walked with that elegance people admired, arm in arm with Maria, talking animatedly as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just shattered the heart of a 69-year-old woman in the middle of an airport full of strangers. But I was still there, frozen, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. People walked around me, dragging their suitcases, hugging their loved ones, living their normal lives while mine crumbled into pieces. A tear rolled down my cheek, then another and another. I couldn't control them. 50 years of marriage had taught me not to cry in public, to keep my composure, to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the woman who never caused problems. But there I was, crying like a lost child in the middle of the largest airport in the city. Are you okay, ma'am? A soft voice snapped me out of my trance. It was a young airline employee with kind eyes, looking at me with genuine concern. Yes, I lied automatically, wiping away the tears with the back of my hand. Just a change of plans. She nodded with understanding. She'd probably seen this scene 1,000 times before. Families falling apart, dreams shattering, hearts breaking in the most unexpected places. Do you need help with anything? Maybe changing your ticket? My ticket, of course. I had a ticket that was now worth nothing, for a destination I could no longer reach, for a trip that no longer included me. "No," I whispered. "There's nothing to change." I started walking toward the exit, dragging my suitcase across the polished floor of the airport. Each step was an effort. Every movement required strength I didn't know where to find. The sounds of the airport seemed distant, like I was walking underwater. I reached the taxi area and stopped. Where was I going? To my empty house, to those four walls that had been my prison for the last 5 years since I had been widowed. To that house where Elena's plants were waiting for me to water them, where her dirty laundry was probably waiting to be washed, where her refrigerator needed to be cleaned before their return. "Taxi, ma'am?" The driver looked at me impatiently. "Yes," I murmured, giving him my address. Music. Throughout the ride home, I couldn't stop thinking about Elena's words. "At your age, you could hurt yourself," as if I were a fragile, useless old woman, as if my 69 years were a contagious disease to be kept at a distance. When had she started seeing me like this? When had I allowed others to decide what I could or couldn't do? I remembered my mother, who at 70 had traveled alone across Europe, who had learned to use computers, who had lived each day as an adventure until the very last moment. But I wasn't like my mother. I had become this small, scared version of myself, someone who asked for permission to exist in her own son's life. When I got home, I opened the door, and the silence hit me like a slap. That silence I knew so well, that had been my constant companion for the past years. I dropped my suitcase at the entrance and headed straight to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my reflection in the vanity mirror. The woman who looked back seemed defeated, small, insignificant. It was as if my entire life had been reduced to this moment, this humiliation, this feeling of not being worth even the price of an airline ticket. I took my phone to call Juana, my only true friend, the only person who might understand what I was feeling, but when I dialed her number, I stopped. What was I going to tell her? How was I going to explain that my own son had replaced me with his wife's friend? How was I going to confess that I had been so foolish to believe they actually wanted me on that trip? I hung up before she could answer. I got up and walked to the closet, where my coral dress hung next to the new shoes I had bought for the trip. I touched them with the tips of my fingers, remembering the excitement I had felt when buying them, the hope I had put into every choice. That was when something broke inside me. It wasn't a dramatic moment, it wasn't an explosion of anger, it was something more subtle and deeper. It was the moment I realized I had spent my entire life trying to earn the love of people who had already decided I didn't deserve it. I took the coral dress and held it in front of me. It was beautiful, elegant, it made me look radiant. I had bought it to impress a family who saw me as a nuisance. I had spent money I didn't have on clothes for a trip I wasn't really invited to. But for the first time in years, instead of feeling sorry for myself, I felt something different. I felt anger, a clean and powerful anger that started in my stomach and spread throughout my body like fire. It wasn't anger at Orlando, although part of me hated what he had become. It wasn't anger at Elena, though her cruelty had been unnecessary. It was anger at myself for allowing this to happen, for becoming so small, so invisible, so desperate for crumbs of affection. I took off the clothes I had carefully chosen for the airport and put on the coral dress. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I liked what I saw. I wasn't a pathetic old woman begging for attention. I was a 69-year-old woman who had raised a son, who had maintained a marriage for 5 decades, who had survived the death of her husband, and who deserved far more than what I was receiving. I went downstairs still wearing the coral dress. The house felt different now, as if it had changed owners in my absence. I looked at Elena's plants on the balcony. Those plants she had ordered me to water, as if I were her personal gardener. I looked at the to-do list she had left stuck to the refrigerator. Clean the house, do the shopping, prepare dinner for when we get back. I took the list and tore it into small pieces. Each piece of paper that fell to the floor was an order I would no longer follow, an expectation I would no longer meet, a chain I had just broken. My phone rang. It was a message from Orlando. "Mom, we're on the plane. Thanks for understanding. Don't forget the plants, not even a 'we love you' or 'we'll miss you.' Just a reminder about the damn plants." I wrote and erased the reply 1,000 times. I wanted to tell him what I really thought. I wanted to scream that he was a coward. I wanted to ask him when I had stopped being his mother and had become his servant. But instead, I simply wrote, "Have a good trip." Then I turned off the phone, went to my desk, and pulled out the checkbook I hadn't used in months. I needed to get out of there. I needed to go somewhere that wasn't that house full of obligations to people who didn't value me. But when I checked my bank account, reality hit me. I barely had enough money for the month's expenses. My entire financial life had depended on Orlando since Kenwood. He managed the finances. He decided how much I could spend. He controlled every penny that came in or out. I had become financially dependent on the generosity of my own son. But then I remembered something. In the back of my closet, there was an old shoebox full of documents I had never reviewed after my husband's death. Orlando had been in charge of organizing everything, but I had kept some papers without him knowing. I ran upstairs and searched for the box. My hands trembled as I went through old bills, receipts, and documents I didn't fully understand. Then, at the bottom of everything, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in my husband's handwriting. I carefully opened it, and inside was a letter and several legal documents. The letter said, "My dear Antonia, if you're reading this, it's because I'm no longer with you. There are things I never told you because I didn't want to worry you, but you need to know them now. The aviation company I inherited from my father was never sold, as we told Orlando. It's in your name now. The documents are in the bank's safe. The code is your birth date. You're wealthier than you imagine. Use this money to be happy, not to please others. I love you forever." My heart stopped. Aviation company, safe, wealthy. None of this made sense. My husband had been an accountant, a modest man who lived off his monthly salary. How could there be a company I didn't know about? I looked over the legal documents. Indeed, there it was, my name as the sole owner of Aerolíneas del Sol, a company that, according to the papers, operated national and international routes. The date on the documents was just 6 months before my husband's death. I sat on the closet floor, holding the papers with trembling hands. My entire life had been a lie. While I had been getting by with a miserable pension, begging for attention from my son, worrying about every penny I spent, I owned an airline. I immediately called the bank. After verifying my identity, they confirmed that I indeed had a safe deposit box in my name and could access it whenever I wanted. An hour later, I was at the bank, still in my coral dress, in front of a safe deposit box that would change my life forever. Inside, there were more documents, bank statements showing figures that made me dizzy, and another letter from my husband explaining why he had kept this secret. Music. I didn't want Orlando to know about the company until he was older and more mature. I feared he would become dependent on easy money. But now that I'm no longer here, the decision is yours. The current CEO, Gustavo Mendoza, has been handling everything. He will explain the details to you. I picked up the phone from the bank's office and called the number on the documents. "Mrs. Antonia," Gustavo's voice sounded excited. "I've been waiting for your call for 5 years. Your husband asked me to keep the company running until you were ready." "Ready for what?" I asked, still in shock. "To take control of your company. Mrs., you own one of the most successful airlines in the country. Would you like us to meet to discuss your options?" 2 hours later, I was sitting in an elegant office in the city center. As I listened to Gustavo explain that I was a millionaire, that my company employed hundreds of people, and that planes were flying all over the continent at that very moment, I couldn't help but ask, "And my son knew nothing about this?" "Your husband was very clear about that. No one was supposed to know until you decided what to do with the information." I thought of Orlando flying at that moment toward his paradise destination, sending me messages about plants to water, treating me like a domestic worker while I owned the airline he was probably flying on. "Gustavo," I said with a smile I hadn't felt in years, "I need you to verify something. We have information on Flight 347 to Cancun that left this morning." "Of course, ma'am. It's one of our flights." He checked his computer. "Family Hernandez, 3 passengers. Is there a problem?" "No, not exactly a problem," I smiled wider. "But I think it's time they meet the true owner of the airline, Gustavo," I said as I reviewed the documents confirming my ownership of the airline. "I want you to do me a very special favor. That flight 347, I want to know all the details about those passengers. His fingers flew over the keyboard. Family Hernandez, he murmured as he read the screen. Orlando Hernandez, Elena Martinez de Hernandez, and interesting, there's a Maria Solis who was added last minute, replacing someone named Antonia Hernandez. Antonia Hernandez. That was my name on the ticket I never used, on the trip from which I had been excluded, in the adventure that had been stolen from me. But now, sitting in that luxurious office, looking at the financials of MY Company, everything had changed. What kind of special services can we offer our VIP passengers? I asked with a smile Gustavo couldn't quite interpret. Well, ma'am, we have upgrades to first class, gourmet food services, access to exclusive lounges, and, of course, special greetings from the captain when it's an important guest. Perfect. I want you to contact the captain of Flight 347. Tell him that the owner of the airline is aboard, and he needs to give her a special greeting. Gustavo looked at me confused. The owner? But you're here with me. Exactly, I smiled. I want him to announce that Antonia Hernandez, owner of Aerolíneas del Sol, is aboard the flight. He understood immediately, and a conspiratorial smile crossed his face. It will be a pleasure, ma'am. As Gustavo made the call to the pilot, I imagined Orlando and Elena's faces when they heard my name over the plane's intercom. The woman they had just humiliated at the airport. The mother who didn't fit into their plans. The elderly woman they thought might hurt herself on the trip. Turns out, she was the owner of the airline they were flying on. All set, ma'am. Captain Raul Vasquez is thrilled to make the announcement. He says it's an honor to know the owner is personally monitoring the quality of the service. Excellent. Now tell me, Gustavo, what do I need to know about my company? The next 2 hours were a revelation after another. My husband had inherited a small aviation company from his father and turned it into an empire. We had contracts with luxury hotels, we operated charter flights for celebrities, and our annual income was more than I had ever spent in my entire life. Your husband reinvested all the profits into the company, explained Gustavo. He lived modestly so no one would suspect. But you're one of the wealthiest women in the country. Meanwhile, my phone started ringing incessantly. Orlando, I let it ring. Elena. I ignored the call. Maria. Why would my daughter-in-law's friend be calling me? Finally, I answered. Mrs. Antonia. Maria's voice sounded nervous, almost scared. Are you really the owner of this airline? Hello, Maria, I responded with a calmness I didn't know I had. How are you enjoying your flight? The one that was supposed to be my seat. Orlando is in shock. Elena can't speak. When the pilot announced that you were the owner, Elena turned completely pale. I imagine. Finding out that the woman you just publicly humiliated is actually your boss. Mrs. Antonia, please, Maria pleaded. I think there was a misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, Maria. I clearly heard when Elena told me to go home because this wasn't for me. I heard when Orlando told me I didn't fit into his plans, and I heard when you thanked me for making your trip possible. An uncomfortable silence filled the line. I could imagine the scene on the plane. Orlando, finally understanding that he had betrayed the only person who truly loved him. Elena, realizing she had completely underestimated the woman she considered a nuisance. Maria, dying of embarrassment for being complicit in my humiliation. Do you want to speak to Orlando? Maria asked, her voice trembling. No, I answered firmly. Right now I'm busy getting to know my company, but tell my son that when he returns from his trip, he and I are going to have a very serious conversation. I hung up before she could respond. Gustavo had been listening discreetly and was looking at me with admiration. Ma'am, if I may say, I think your husband would be very proud. He always said you were stronger than you thought. It seems he was right. Now, Gustavo, I need to understand something. How is it possible that Orlando knew nothing about the company? He never asked where the money for his education, for his wedding, for the apartment we bought for him came from. Your husband was very careful. He had a legitimate accounting business that generated modest income to justify a middle-class lifestyle. The big expenses were handled through loans, either fake or occasional bonds. Orlando never questioned anything. Of course, he never questioned anything. Orlando had accepted every gift, every financial help, every opportunity as something he deserved by right. He had never questioned how a modest accountant could afford to pay for a private university or finance an elegant wedding. "And now what, ma'am?" Gustavo asked. "What are your plans for the company?" For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I had real options. I didn't depend on my son's charity. I didn't have to beg for his attention. I didn't have to accept being treated like a domestic worker in my own life. "First," I said, getting up from the chair and feeling a new strength running through my veins, "I want to know everything about this company, every plane, every route, every employee." And second, I smiled with a determination I hadn't felt in decades. "I want to plan the trip of my life." My phone rang again. Orlando, once more. This time, I decided to answer. "Mom," his voice sounded desperate. "We need to talk." "Now you want to talk to me?" I replied. "How interesting, Mom." I responded, "How interesting." "Please, Mom. I don't understand what's happening. The pilot said you're the owner of the airline. That can't be true, right?" I heard his voice, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the automatic impulse to comfort him, to make him feel better, to minimize my pain to protect his. Instead, I felt a strange calm, almost cold. "Your father was many things you never knew, Orlando. And apparently, so was I." "But Mom, if you really own an airline, why didn't you tell us? Why did you live as if you had no money?" The question hurt me in a way I wasn't expecting. Why hadn't I known? Why had I lived for 5 years as a poor widow, depending on my son's charity, when I was actually a rich, independent woman? "Because your father wanted to protect you," I finally said. "He wanted you to be a hardworking, humble person before you knew the truth about our financial situation, but he died before he could tell you, and you decided to keep lying." His accusatory tone made my blood boil. Even now, even after discovering that he had humiliated the owner of an airline, Orlando still found a way to make me feel guilty. "I didn't know anything, Orlando. I just discovered this today, after you left me stranded at the airport like I was garbage." An uncomfortable silence filled the line. I could hear background voices, probably Elena, asking what was going on. "Mom, Elena wants to talk to you." I'm not interested in what Elena has to say. She already told me everything I needed to know this morning at the airport. "Please, Mom." "She's very sorry." "We're all sorry." "Sorry for what exactly, Orlando? For humiliating me publicly? For treating me like a domestic worker? Or are you sorry because you found out the woman you despise turns out to be a millionaire?" Another long pause. The answer to my question was in that silence. "Mom, you know we love you." There was just a misunderstanding. I didn't interrupt. There was no misunderstanding. For years, I've been treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. I've accepted crumbs of attention. I've begged for an invitation to my own son's table. I've lived waiting for the scraps of affection you decided to give me. Gustavo watched me from his desk, clearly impressed by the conversation he was witnessing. He gestured for privacy, but I shook my head. I needed witnesses to this moment. "Mom, please, when we get back, we can fix all of this. We can talk." "We can." "What, Orlando? Pretend nothing happened? Act like you didn't tell me I didn't fit into your plans? Pretend Elena didn't tell me to go home as if I were a punished child?" "It was a mistake, Mom." Elena was stressed about the trip. I was nervous about work. We didn't think clearly. There it was again. Excuses, justifications, everything but a real apology, everything but acknowledging that they had hurt me deliberately. "You know what, Orlando? You're right about one thing. I don't fit into your plans, but it turns out I no longer need to fit into anyone else's plans." "What do you mean?" "I mean that this afternoon, I'm going to start making my own plans. I'm going to get to know my company. I'm going to travel to all the places I've always wanted to see. I'm going to live the life I deserve instead of the life you decided to give me." Elena had taken the phone. Her voice sounded different, smaller, less sure than it had that morning at the airport. "Antonia, it's Elena. I wanted to apologize for what happened this morning. It really wasn't my intention to hurt you." "It wasn't your intention to hurt me?" I repeated. "Elena, you told me to go home because this wasn't for me. You treated me like a domestic worker. You gave me orders about watering plants and cleaning the house. What part of that wasn't intended to hurt me?" I thought you'd understand. The trip was important for Maria and us. We had things to plan. What am I in your mind, Elena? A nuisance, a senile old woman. No, of course not. You're Orlando's mother. Exactly. I'm Orlando's mother. Not your maid, not your babysitter, not your personal gardener. I'm the mother of the man who says he loves you, and you treated me like I was worth nothing. I heard Elena start crying. Part of me, the part that had been trained for decades to comfort others, wanted to tell her everything was fine, that I forgave her, that we could forget what had happened. But that part of me had died that morning at the airport. Elena, I continued with a voice I didn't recognize as mine, for years you've been pushing Orlando away from me. You've turned every family gathering into a competition where I always lost. You've made my own son see me as a burden instead of his mother. That's not true. It's completely true. And the worst part is that Orlando has allowed you to do it. My own son has chosen your comfort over my dignity, time and time again. Orlando had taken the phone back. Mom, please, when we get back, everything will change, I promise. I said, with a firmness that surprised me, I no longer need your promises, Orlando. I no longer need to wait for you to decide to include me in your life. I no longer need to beg for crumbs of your attention. What are you saying? I'm saying that for the first time in 5 years, I feel free. Free of expectations, free of disappointments, free from the desperate need to earn the love of people who have clearly decided I don't deserve it. Gustavo handed me a note. The flight lands in 3 hours. Any special instructions? I smiled as I read the note. Orlando kept talking, begging, promising changes we both knew would never come. Orlando, I interrupted. Enjoy the rest of your trip. When you get back, you'll find your house exactly as you left it. Elena's plants will still be alive. Don't worry, Mom. But I won't be there waiting for you. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in years, I felt a silence that didn't scare me. It was a silence full of possibilities, instead of emptiness and loneliness. Gustavo, I said, turning to him, I need you to help me with something. I want you to know exactly who I am, I said, as a smile of determination crossed my face. Not the pathetic woman they humiliated this morning, but the owner of the company that just gave them the trip of their lives. Gustavo smiled knowingly. You're thinking of a special welcome, aren't you? Exactly. I wanted them to understand exactly what they had just done when they stepped off the plane. We spent the next hour planning every detail. Gustavo contacted the manager at Cancun Airport, organized a special reception, and made sure Orlando, Elena, and Maria would know exactly who had made every moment of luxury they had just experienced possible. Meanwhile, I made a decision I had been avoiding for 5 years. I called Juana, my only true friend, the woman I'd known since college, who had always told me the truth, even when it hurt to hear it. Antonia, her voice sounded surprised. How are you? I thought you'd be flying somewhere exotic with Orlando. Juana, I need to tell you something. Can you come see me? Of course. Are you okay? You sound different. I'm more than okay. For the first time in years, I'm awake. An hour later, Juana was sitting in my living room, listening with increasingly wide eyes as I told her everything that had happened, the humiliation at the airport, the discovery of the airline, the phone confrontation with Orlando and Elena. My God, Antonia, she murmured when I finished. I always knew Elena was a viper, but this is cruel even for her. Why didn't you ever tell me what you really thought of her? Juana sighed. Because you defended her. Every time I tried to point out how she treated you, you found excuses for her. You said she was young, that she was adjusting, that Orlando made her happy. She was right. I had spent years justifying Elena's behavior, minimizing her slights, convincing myself that I was too sensitive, too demanding, too needy. And Orlando, Juana continued, that boy you raised, turned into a man who allows his wife to treat his mother like trash. The words hurt because they were true. The sweet boy I had raised, the one who had once promised me he would always take care of me, had become a stranger who chose the comfort of his marriage over respect for his mother. But now everything is different, I told her. I have options I didn't know I had. I have power I didn't know I possessed. And what will you do with that power? It was a good question. What would I do? Part of me wanted revenge. I wanted to use my new position to make Orlando and Elena pay for all the years of humiliation. But another part of me, a deeper and wiser part, wanted something different. I want to live, I finally said. I want to live as the woman I am, not as the pathetic shadow I had become. Juana smiled. That's the Antonia I knew in college, the woman who was brave, independent, who wasn't afraid of anything. You really were that way. You were incredible. You were the only one in our class who dared to challenge the professors when they were wrong. You were the one who organized student protests, the one who stood up for the Shire girls when they were bullied. It was hard for me to remember that woman. 45 years of marriage and motherhood had buried the rebellious Antonia under layers of compliance and self-sacrifice. Do you know what's the saddest thing? I said. I spent so much time trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect mother-in-law, that I forgot to just be me. It's not too late to remember who you are. My phone rang. It was Gustavo. Mrs. Antonia, I have news from Cancun Airport. The flight has landed and your guests have received the full message about who you really are and how they reacted. According to the airport manager, Orlando looked completely devastated. Elena couldn't stop crying, and Maria seemed like she wanted to disappear. They were given a letter you dictated and a special itinerary for the rest of their stay. The letter was simple, but clear. It explained that all the luxuries they were enjoying, the 5-star hotel, private excursions, gourmet dinners, were courtesy of the woman they had humiliated that morning. It told them they could enjoy the trip they stole from me, but when they returned, they would find a very different world. And the special itinerary? I asked. Every activity includes a small plaque that says courtesy of Antonia Hernandez, owner of Aerolíneas del Sol. The hotel manager will constantly remind them that they are enjoying the generosity of the woman they excluded from the trip. I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't exactly revenge, but it was poetic justice. Perfect. Now, Gustavo, I want you to organize something for me. I want the best trip you can plan. I don't care about the cost, I don't care about the distance. I want to see all the places I've always dreamed of visiting. When do you want to depart, ma'am? I looked at Juana, who was watching me with a proud smile. I looked at my house, filled with memories of a life that no longer belonged to me. I looked out the window toward a world I was finally ready to explore. Tomorrow, I said. I want to leave tomorrow. Juana clapped. Antonia, can I go with you? Would you leave everything to come with me on an adventure? Dear, I've been waiting for this invitation for 50 years. For the first time since my husband's death, I felt like my life was starting instead of ending. The next morning, I woke up with a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Pure excitement for the day ahead. It wasn't the nervous anxiety of wondering if Orlando would call me or the constant worry of whether I had done something to upset Elena. It was the clean excitement of a woman who had finally taken control of her own life. Juana arrived early with 2 suitcases and a smile she couldn't contain. Ready to conquer the world, she asked as she entered my house. More than ready, I replied, and for the first time in a long time, my words had the weight of truth. Gustavo had worked all night preparing our itinerary. First destination, Paris, the city I had always dreamed of seeing but could never visit because it was too expensive or because Orlando needed the money for other things. Then Venice, then Japan. And finally, a week in a private resort in the Maldives. Ma'am, Gustavo had told me on the phone, I've reserved the presidential suite at each hotel. You'll have private chauffeurs, personal guides, and access to experiences normally reserved for royalty. As I packed, my phone kept ringing. Orlando called every half hour. Elena sent desperate text messages. Even Maria had tried to contact me. They all wanted to talk. They all wanted to explain. They all wanted me to understand their behavior, but I no longer needed their explanations. I responded, how interesting. Please, Mom. I don't understand what's happening. The pilot said you're the owner of the airline. That can't be true, right? I heard his voice, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the automatic impulse to comfort him, to make him feel better, to minimize my pain to protect his. Instead, I felt a strange calm, almost cold. Your father was many things you never knew, Orlando. And apparently, so was I. But Mom, if you really own an airline, why didn't you tell us? Why did you live as if you had no money? The question hurt me in a way I wasn't expecting. Why hadn't I known? Why had I lived for 5 years as a poor widow, depending on my son's charity, when I was actually a rich, independent woman? Because your father wanted to protect you, I finally said. He wanted you to be a hardworking, humble person before you knew the truth about our financial situation, but he died before he could tell you, and you decided to keep lying. His accusatory tone made my blood boil. Even now, even after discovering that he had humiliated the owner of an airline, Orlando still found a way to make me feel guilty. I didn't know anything, Orlando. I just discovered this today, after you left me stranded at the airport like I was garbage. An uncomfortable silence filled the line. I could hear background voices, probably Elena, asking what was going on. Mom, Elena wants to talk to you. I'm not interested in what Elena has to say. She already told me everything I needed to know this morning at the airport. Please, Mom. She's very sorry. We're all sorry. Sorry for what exactly, Orlando? For humiliating me publicly? For treating me like a domestic worker? Or are you sorry because you found out the woman you despise turns out to be a millionaire? Another long pause. The answer to my question was in that silence. Mom, you know we love you. There was just a misunderstanding. I didn't interrupt. There was no misunderstanding. For years, I've been treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. I've accepted crumbs of attention. I've begged for an invitation to my own son's table. I've lived waiting for the scraps of affection you decided to give me. Gustavo watched me from his desk, clearly impressed by the conversation he was witnessing. He gestured for privacy, but I shook my head. I needed witnesses to this moment. Mom, please, when we get back, we can fix all of this. We can talk. We can. What, Orlando? Pretend nothing happened? Act like you didn't tell me I didn't fit into your plans? Pretend Elena didn't tell me to go home as if I were a punished child. It was a mistake, Mom. Elena was stressed about the trip. I was nervous about work. We didn't think clearly. There it was again. Excuses, justifications, everything but a real apology, everything but acknowledging that they had hurt me deliberately. You know what, Orlando? You're right about one thing. I don't fit into your plans, but it turns out I no longer need to fit into anyone else's plans. What do you mean? I mean that this afternoon, I'm going to start making my own plans. I'm going to get to know my company. I'm going to travel to all the places I've always wanted to see. I'm going to live the life I deserve instead of the life you decided to give me. Elena had taken the phone. Her voice sounded different, smaller, less sure than it had that morning at the airport. Antonia, it's Elena. I wanted to apologize for what happened this morning. It really wasn't my intention to hurt you. It wasn't your intention to hurt me? I repeated. Elena, you told me to go home because this wasn't for me. You treated me like a domestic worker. You gave me orders about watering plants and cleaning the house. What part of that wasn't intended to hurt me? I thought you'd understand. The trip was important for Maria and us. We had things to plan. What am I in your mind, Elena? A nuisance, a senile old woman. No, of course not. You're Orlando's mother. Exactly. I'm Orlando's mother. Not your maid, not your babysitter, not your personal gardener. I'm the mother of the man who says he loves you, and you treated me like I was worth nothing. I heard Elena start crying. Part of me, the part that had been trained for decades to comfort others, wanted to tell her everything was fine, that I forgave her, that we could forget what had happened. But that part of me had died that morning at the airport. Elena, I continued with a voice I didn't recognize as mine, for years you've been pushing Orlando away from me. You've turned every family gathering into a competition where I always lost. You've made my own son see me as a burden instead of his mother. That's not true. It's completely true. And the worst part is that Orlando has allowed you to do it. My own son has chosen your comfort over my dignity, time and time again. Orlando had taken the phone back. Mom, please, when we get back, everything will change, I promise. I said, with a firmness that surprised me, I no longer need your promises, Orlando. I no longer need to wait for you to decide to include me in your life. I no longer need to beg for crumbs of your attention. What are you saying? I'm saying that for the first time in 5 years, I feel free. Free of expectations, free of disappointments, free from the desperate need to earn the love of people who have clearly decided I don't deserve it. Gustavo handed me a note. The flight lands in 3 hours. Any special instructions? I smiled as I read the note. Orlando kept talking, begging, promising changes we both knew would never come. Orlando, I interrupted. Enjoy the rest of your trip. When you get back, you'll find your house exactly as you left it. Elena's plants will still be alive. Don't worry, Mom. But I won't be there waiting for you. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in years, I felt a silence that didn't scare me. It was a silence full of possibilities, instead of emptiness and loneliness. Gustavo, I said, turning to him, I need you to help me with something. I want you to know exactly who I am, I said, as a smile of determination crossed my face. Not the pathetic woman they humiliated this morning, but the owner of the company that just gave them the trip of their lives. Gustavo smiled knowingly. You're thinking of a special welcome, aren't you? Exactly. It was in the morning at the airport when you told me I didn't fit into your plans and finally showed me where my place was in your new life. Tears were running down your cheeks, but I strangely felt calm. I wasn't speaking out of pain or anger. I was speaking from clarity. I'm sorry, you murmured. I'm sorry for everything. Beatriz also feels it. She wanted to come apologize, but I thought it would be better for us to talk first. Beatriz, she feels it. I asked. I'm sorry you discovered that the woman you humiliated turns out to be a millionaire. Orlando couldn't respond to that, and his silence was enough of an answer. Orlando, you're my son, and I'll always love you. But I'm no longer going to live my life waiting for your attention. I won't accept being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. What does that mean? It means that things are going to change. First, I'm moving. His eyes widened in shock. You're moving? Where to? I bought an apartment in the city center, near the offices of my company. I'm going to be actively involved in managing the airline. Your father built something incredible, and it's time for me to get to know it. But Mom, this is your home. I grew up here. All our memories are here. This house is full of memories of a woman I no longer am. The new Beatriz needs a new place. I told him about my plans. I was going to create a foundation to help older women who had gotten lost in the expectations of others. I was going to travel regularly, exploring the world that had been waiting for me for decades. I was going to live each day as a gift, not as an obligation. And what about us? He asked in a small voice. That depends on you, Orlando. If you want a relationship with me, it will be on terms of mutual respect. I will no longer tolerate any contempt from Beatriz. I will not accept being treated like a burden, and I will not beg for your attention. Beatriz really wants to change. Beatriz wants to maintain access to the family wealth she has just discovered. There's a difference. We spoke for hours. Orlando cried, apologized. He promised everything would be different. Part of me wanted to believe him. I wanted to go back to being the accommodating mother who forgave everything. But I had learned something important in those 3 weeks. Forgiveness doesn't mean allowing the same mistreatment again. I love you, Orlando, I told him as he was preparing to leave. But for the first time in my life, I love myself more, and that isn't going to change. After he left, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, looking at the plants Beatriz had ordered me to water. They were perfect, green, and flourishing. I had taken care of them, but not out of obligation. I had taken care of them because I enjoyed watching them grow. My phone rang. It was Gustavo with news about a new project from the company. As we spoke about expansions and future plans, I realized something wonderful. For the first time in decades, I was excited about tomorrow. 6 months later, my new life was fully established. My apartment was a haven of peace and beauty. My work at the airline gave me purpose and satisfaction. My foundation had already helped 50 women rediscover their self-worth. Orlando visited regularly, alone. Beatriz had tried to approach several times, but I had been clear. Respect is not negotiable, it is earned. Are you happy, Mom? Orlando asked me during one of our monthly dinners. I'm free, I replied. And freedom, when you finally find it after decades of not having it, feels very much like happiness. That night I wrote in my journal. At 69, I learned that it's never too late to choose your own life, that true love begins with yourself, and that sometimes the best adventures begin exactly when you think everything has ended. The woman who had been humiliated at an airport no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who was living her dreams, and who finally understood that the most extraordinary life is the one you choose to live for yourself. 2 years later, I was standing on the deck of my private yacht, sailing through the crystal-clear waters of the Mediterranean. Carmen was reading a book beside me while Captain Uriel, one of my most trusted employees, guided us toward the next Greek island we wanted to explore. The afternoon sun created golden reflections on the water, and for a moment, I stopped to think about how surreal this new reality felt. My phone vibrated with a message from Maria, surprisingly. "Beatriz, I wanted to thank you. Seeing what you did inspired me to leave my abusive husband. Now I have my own catering business, and for the first time in 15 years, I feel alive. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to change." I smiled as I read. In the past 2 years, I had received hundreds of similar messages. Women of all ages who had seen my story in magazines, who had heard about the foundation in the news, who had decided they too deserved more than they were receiving. Each message was a reminder that my pain had served something greater than myself. My relationship with Orlando had found a new and surprisingly healthy balance. We saw each other every 2 weeks for dinner, but on my terms and at places of my choosing. He had started therapy to understand how he had allowed his marriage to damage our relationship. Beatrice had finally understood that her previous behavior had been unacceptable. And while our relationship would never be warm, at least it was respectful. She had learned to call me by my name instead of ignoring me, and she no longer gave me orders about plants or household chores. "What are you thinking about?" Carmen asked, noticing my contemplative smile. "How strange life is," I replied. The worst day of my existence became the first day of my real life. If someone had told me 2 years ago that I would be sailing through Greece on my own yacht, I would have thought they were crazy. Carmen closed her book and walked up to the railing where I was. "You know what impresses me most about all this?" "What?" "That you didn't change to get revenge on Orlando and Beatriz. You changed for yourself. That's the difference between a real transformation and just a tantrum with money." She was right. During the first few months after the airport incident, I had felt the temptation to use my newfound wealth to make Orlando and Beatriz pay for their cruelty. I could have taken Orlando's job away. I could have made Beatriz feel as small as I had felt. But I had learned something important. Revenge keeps you attached to your pain, while liberation lets you move on. That afternoon, as we dined at a seaside restaurant in Santorini, an older woman approached our table with hesitant steps. She wore a simple but clean dress, and her eyes had that look I knew all too well, the one of someone who has lived too long being invisible. "Are you Beatriz Hernandez?" she asked timidly. "I read about you in a magazine my granddaughter showed me. I'm 75 years old, and my family treats me exactly how you described in that interview. Do you really think there is still time for me, dear?" I said, taking her wrinkled hand in mine. "Life doesn't have an expiration date, it only has moments of awakening. Yours could be today, if you decided so." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of hope, not despair. She told me her story over the next 20 minutes. She was a widow, financially dependent on her son, treated as a free babysitter for her grandchildren, and ignored when it came to important family decisions. "My son tells me I should be grateful that he lets me live in his house," she whispered. "But that house was mine before I gave it to him." I gave her my personal card and the contact for Beatriz Vargas, the director of my foundation. "Call her tomorrow. We have programs for women in your exact situation. You're not alone, and it's definitely not too late." The woman left with a smile she probably hadn't shown in years, and I felt thankful once again for having turned my pain into purpose. That night, I wrote in my journal. I discovered that the true legacy isn't the money you leave behind or the businesses you build. It's the number of people you inspire to value themselves. It's showing other women that their story doesn't end when others decide they're no longer important. It's proving that dignity isn't something others give you, it's something you claim for yourself. The next day, while we sailed toward Mykonos, I received a call from Gustavo with exciting news. "Ma'am, we have several interesting proposals." An international television network wants to make a documentary about your story and the foundation. There's also a publisher who wants to release a book about your experience, and a group of universities wants you to give lectures on personal reinvention after 60. What for? I asked, although I already knew the answer. To show the world that reinvention has no age, that dignity is non-negotiable, and that sometimes the most beautiful endings begin with the most painful rejections. I looked at the endless horizon stretching before us, filled with possibilities I was just beginning to explore. I thought about Beatrice from 2 years ago, the woman who had stood at an airport with a broken heart, feeling as if her life had ended. If I could speak to that woman, I would tell her that the pain she was feeling was not the end of her story, but the prologue to the best part. Say yes to everything, I replied, but with one condition. The message must be crystal clear. No matter how old you are, no matter how much time you've lived for others, no matter how many times you've been made to feel invisible or insignificant, it's never too late to choose to live for yourself. Carmen applauded from her chair. That's going to be a conference worth listening to. That afternoon, as the yacht gently rocked in the bay waters, I received an unexpected call from Orlando. His voice sounded different, more mature, more reflective. Mom, I wanted to tell you something. Beatrice and I are seeing a marriage counselor. We're working on our behavior patterns, especially how we treat the people we love. I'm glad to hear that, Orlando, I replied, and then I asked, do you think you'll ever be able to completely forgive me? The question took me by surprise. I had been so focused on rebuilding my own life that I hadn't thought much about forgiveness. Orlando, I said after a moment, I've already forgiven you. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it definitely doesn't mean allowing the same behavior again. It means choosing not to carry resentment because it's too heavy for the new life I'm building. And our relationship is better now than ever because it's finally based on mutual respect, not on my desperation for your approval. When I hung up, I realized that this conversation had marked the definitive closure of my old life. I was no longer the mother begging for scraps of attention. I was a complete woman who chose to have a healthy relationship with her adult son. As the sun set over the Mediterranean, painting the sky with oranges and pinks, I thought about all the women who, right now, feel invisible, who think their best days are behind them, who believe they don't deserve more than what they're getting. Because that was the truth I had learned at 69, when a cruel rejection gave me the greatest gift of all, my life, finally lived on my own terms.